Hi, everyone. Welcome to C-Band's 2024 Spring Summit. It's really good to see you all here. As Todd said, this is a one-day get-together for us to reconnect after a long winter, to talk broadband access and equity, and to just set our agenda kind of for the rest of the year. So thank you, members and non-members who are here today. We've got a great attendance turnout online and in person. So we're really happy that you're here in the room. Just a couple things before we get started. I would like to introduce our board member who's here today. He's someone that none of you will know. Please say hello to Dave Schilling. Dave, so proud to have him on the C-Band board. Also today from the C-Band crew is Curtis Dean, Todd Kilkop, Bree Delavu, and myself, I'm John Willow. And we're all so glad that you're here. And we are so excited for our keynote speaker today. And, you guys have all been with us since the beginning. This is our first live keynote speaker, so it's extremely exciting for us. And we have one of the best ones going around on the circuit these days. She's a longtime consumer advocate, and she started working to democratize cable and television in 1988, which might sound like a familiar path for some people in this room. As the world turned and we all drifted towards signal, our speaker did the same. And she moved into broadband advocacy, where she has been a vital force. In fact, there's really no way to succinctly summarize this woman's career. She's going to have to fill in for you. She is the executive director of the American Association for Public Broadband. She's a fellow at the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, a former FCC staffer, and a Biden FCC commissioner nominee who found herself at the center of an epic firestorm, which I will let her tell you about that. So if we can give a big C-Band welcome for our keynote speaker, let's welcome Gigi Sohn.
I am so thankful for these stairs. So am I talking into the lavalier or am I talking into this? What are we doing? Okay, cool. So good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. John, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And this is my first time in Iowa. And thank you, Curtis. Curtis actually was the person who I first met. I'll talk a little bit about how we met, and got the bright idea that I should come to Iowa and speak with all of you. And I'm really, really pleased. This is really my first time in Iowa ever. And I'm honored to be in the state that has the highest number of municipal broadband networks. Now, I love Iowa so much. I've been here really only about 24 hours? I had to get some swag. I had to get some Iowa swag. And I thought I would get, Iowa women's basketball, something like that. But I really found the ideal swag right up the road. And I also got a t-shirt. And I will tell you, my family and friends on the East Coast got a huge kick out of this. I don't know why. I used to think Wawa was a funny name for a convenience store, but I think you guys have it over Wawa. I understand it's going away to be replaced by Bucky the Beaver or something like that. So I'm sorry, because for this alone, like if somebody had told me 20 years ago, you could get a come and go t-shirt if you just went to Iowa, I would have done it a long time ago. So thank you for welcoming me here. I really appreciate it. So before I start, I want to talk a little bit about AAPB, the American Association for Public Broadband, and who we are. So we're a nonprofit trade association representing broadband networks across the United States that are controlled by local communities and their residents. AAPB believes that communities should be free to choose the communications networks that best meet the needs of their residents. They should have the freedom to choose without legal barriers, without press barriers, without lobbying barriers, you name it. And that means promoting the growth of public broadband, defending against attacks, and unfortunately I've had to do a lot of that, and that's part of what my speech is going to be about, and ensuring that public networks are not disadvantaged from receiving state, local, and federal broadband funding. And just to be clear, I'm going to be using the terms public broadband, municipal broadband, community broadband interchangeably, What links them all together is local ownership and control of the infrastructure. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The opening line to Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens could also accurately describe the current state of public broadband. Let's talk first about the best of times, the good news. Community broadband is 650 networks strong. 450 of those networks are owned by local communities, and another 200 by cooperatives, which are owned by members of a local community. According to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ILSR, dozens more community networks are in the pipeline across the country and in the state as well, as you know. State barriers to public broadband are starting to fall, and where they still exist, enterprising communities figure out a way to get around them. While there are still 16 states that restrict community broadband, the Colorado State Legislature repealed its restrictions nearly a year ago, and there really wasn't even a fight. The number of individual successes is striking. While networks like Chattanooga EPB, Wilson, North Carolina, it's called Greenlight, and Loose Fiber out of Lafayette, Louisiana, are still the North Stars for community networks for a lot of people, one no longer need to rely on them to make the case that community broadband is a success. So let me give you some examples. SandyNet of Sandy, Oregon. So Sandy, Oregon is between Mount Hood and Portland. Population is 11,000. They started with DSL and then fixed wireless until 2014, when it built a fiber to the home network. It was hoping in the first year for a 35% take rate, and they got a 50% take rate. Today, that take rate hovers around 70% for gigabit symmetrical service that costs just $59.99. Built in 2014, NextLight, Longmont, Colorado city-owned network, topped PC Magazine's Reader Choice Rankings in 2023, which asked readers to rate their satisfaction with their residential broadband providers. The magazine noted that NextLight's near-perfect scores, including an astronomical 9.9 for overall satisfaction, are unprecedented in the history of PC Mag surveys of ISPs. NextLight's current take rate is 64%, and it recently announced it's going to expand its network beyond city limits. In 2019, Pharr, Texas, was named the worst connected city in the nation by the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We heard about them. They're really the premier national digital equity organization in the country, and they do give grants to organizations like C-band. 5 years later, Pharr, Texas was one of the best. Like many other communities, Pharr was spurred to build its own network when the COVID-19 pandemic forced residents to attend school, work, and doctor's appointments online. Using a combination of low-interest bonds and American Rescue Plan funds, Pharr.net now reaches 75% of the city, with the objective of reaching 100% this summer. The city has prioritized reaching low-income communities and making their service affordable, with a $25 a month, 500 megabits per second symmetrical service, a $50 a month gigabit symmetrical service, and an $80 a month 2 gigabit symmetrical service. Pretty impressive. Then, of course, there is the great state of Iowa. And I'm just going to repeat, because it bears repeating, that you're the home to the greatest number of municipal broadband networks. 29, I think, is what Curtis told me yesterday, to be exact. There are numerous successes here, and if I leave you out, I apologize. I can't name all 29. But the successes include Cedar Falls, Benton, Pella, Waverly, Indianola, and others, with more to come in Decorah, Waterloo, Fort Dodge, and West Des Moines. Since it is a relatively unique model and the hometown of a certain very famous Iowa basketball player, I'll highlight West Des Moines for a moment. Plant the Speed is the name of West Des Moines' citywide open access conduit network that has partnered with G-Fiber, that's the new name for Google Fiber, Mediacom, Lumen, and local ISP MyFiber to provide last mile service to residents of the city. While the city originally proposed installing the drops from the network to the home, it changed course, and the ISP of the residents choosing will now provide those connections. What makes West Des Moines network special for me is the city's efforts at getting low-income households online. It has provided hotspots and public Wi-Fi as a bridge to low-income residents, with the goal of providing fiber to the home. The city offers a website that helps residents choose between providers and gives them plain English instructions for applying for the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, the $30 a month broadband subsidy provided by the Federal Communications Commission. For West Des Moines, digital equity isn't an afterthought, it's baked into the system. If you want to see other examples of successful community broadband networks, I recommend AAPB's recently published handbook, and it's called Own Your Internet: How to Build a Public Broadband Network. This handbook is a plain language primer laying out the decisions a community must make and the steps it must take to build a public broadband network. We hope that the handbook, along with a series of webinars that start on April 16th, look on our website, aapb.us, will encourage more communities to consider building their own networks. I've given you just a snippet of the best of times. If you don't know already, Christopher Mitchell and his colleagues at ILSR, again, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, catalog every new, proposed, and active community broadband build. I highly recommend signing up for his Community Networks blog. ILSR also has the best map detailing where community broadband networks are dividing them by business models and whether they are partial or complete. Naturally, since public broadband networks are doing so well, incumbent telco and cable companies are doing whatever they can to stop their growth, and in some cases, reverse it. I started as executive director of AAPB in June of last year. And in the 10 months since I started, I've helped efforts to thwart half a dozen attacks on community broadband. And I'm not taking full responsibility, I just helped. I also know that there have been several unsuccessful state efforts to deny public broadband funding from the Commerce Department's Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, or BEAD program. To the credit of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, many of those legislative efforts have been nipped in the bud. As an entity that will give states their BEAD funding, NTIA can be very persuasive in convincing those states that trying to block community broadband networks from receiving grant awards is ill-advised. And by the way, for any of you that have read the NTIA's BEAD notice of funding opportunity, not allowed, states are not allowed to discriminate against community broadband networks. Although it's kind of funny, right? To see some of the states that have restrictions, like Pennsylvania, for example, saying, well, a community broadband network could certainly apply for a BEAD grant. They can't build in our state, but they can apply. I mean, that's how they're trying to get through that. And unfortunately, I think NTIA feels it doesn't really have the authority to do very much about it. So the worst of times for community broadband consists in part of attacks ripped from the same playbook. An incumbent broadband provider, typically a cable company, pays an organization with an anodyne name that doesn't have to reveal its donors to undermine a new or existing network by, for example, engaging in a press and media strategy to attack it and/or trying to get signatures on a petition to place the question of the network's existence on a ballot initiative. The latter strategy was part of an attempt to stop Bountiful City, Utah, which is about 30 miles north of Salt Lake City, from partnering with Utopia Fiber to build its own network this past summer. Not long after the city council voted unanimously to move forward with the network, an organization called the Utah Taxpayers Association, again, anodyne, hired a group called, get this one, Gather Utah, to go door to door to gather signatures that would put the question to voters of whether the city should move forward with the network. The Gather Utah workers told residents that they were from the government, which was a lie. And they told them that they supported the fiber project, which was also a lie. Where does the Utah Taxpayer Association get its funding? As a 501c4 nonprofit organization, it doesn't have to reveal its donors. And it didn't do so after being asked by the press. The UTA is what is known as a dark money organization. Corporate donors could hide behind these nonprofits where, as here, it would be deadly to its cause to act in its own name, right? So if, let's just grab a name, Comcast went around and started, placing ads saying, we don't want a community network, like, who's going to listen to them? Nobody. So they hide behind these dark money groups. Residents surmised that UTA's funding came from one or both of the incumbents in the city, Comcast and Lumen. Lumen denied involvement, Comcast did not. Construction on the Bountiful City network was supposed to start last July, but putting the already settled question of whether the community supported the public network on the November ballot would have cost the city millions of dollars, and even if the community had voted to move forward, it would have delayed deployment by at least 8 months. Now, the city, to its credit, did not take this attack lying down. While Gather Utah was able to garner enough signatures on the petition to put the matter on the ballot, the city, through advertising and numerous town halls, convinced enough people to take their names off the petition, and the effort failed. AAPB did raise a row in the press, including publishing an op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune and running a number of TV ads. But community support for the network was the deciding factor. I was happy to help, but it was the city council, if I can be really clear, was pissed that this was going on. And they really sprung into action, and the community leaders and also the grassroots. Bountiful City did what it did in the first place because people in the community were like, we are not being served. We need our own network. We need to own our own infrastructure. That attack was quickly followed by more attacks on Utopia Fiber. So Utopia Fiber, Kim McKinley is actually on the board of AAPB, but they are like the new punching bag because they've been super successful with their open access networks. So Utopia Fiber was being attacked, and community broadband networks in Michigan, Virginia, and Massachusetts were also being attacked. This time, the culprit was a group called the Domestic Policy Caucus. Well, who could hate the Domestic Policy Caucus? Such a great name. They attacked Utopia Fiber with numerous TV ads. In addition to its nogovinternet.com website, feel free to look it up, the organization has a separate project in Massachusetts called Mass Priorities, one word. Among other things, Mass Priorities targeted FalmouthNet, a 5-year-old nonprofit in Falmouth, Massachusetts, that has done little more than obtain a feasibility study for a public broadband network. After several residents expressed concern and AAPB put out a press statement questioning the Domestic Policy Caucus's funding, the Falmouth Enterprise, a local newspaper, asked Christopher Thrasher, it's a great name, Christopher Thrasher, he was the head of Mass Priorities, where the DPC gets its funding. His answer was, I don't have to tell you. Comcast is the only ISP in Falmouth. The Domestic Policy Caucus has been fairly quiet after AAP pushed back with ads of its own in Utah, and the Falmouth Enterprise and community residents expressed concern about Mass Priorities and its lack of transparency. In February, I traveled to Falmouth and other parts of Cape Cod to talk about public broadband and the dark money attacks. FalmouthNet invited Mr. Thrasher to debate me, but he never responded. Now, can I just say as an aside, do not go to Cape Cod, Massachusetts in February. It's a very bad idea. I actually, they had me, so I'm only doing 2 speaking engagements here, which is low. They had me do 5 speaking engagements, but 3 of them had to be virtual because it's 8 inches the second day I was there. So I did get home though. There are 2 other recent attacks that deserve attention. First, which Curtis alerted me to, is legislation introduced by a new Kentucky state senator named Jay, spelled G-E-X, Williams, to force the Frankfurt Plant Board to sell its broadband network. The Plant Board has run a communications network of one kind or another since 1952 and has provided broadband service since 2021. I find it puzzling that the first thing a brand new state senator would propose is legislation to force the sale of a successful public broadband network with a 65% take rate. It's even more puzzling when you consider that the sale is opposed not only by the Plant Board, but also by just about every official in the city and the county. AAPB sent a letter to the Kentucky General Assembly urging them to reject Senator Williams' bill and published an op-ed in several Kentucky newspapers requesting the same. The Plant Board and local officials are pulling out all the stops to beat back the legislation. I think they had billboards, they hired a lobbyist, which of course got them criticized. The bill's made a little progress. It was passed by a Senate committee in a 6-5 vote, but there's no companion bill in the House. And with the legislative session due to end in a week, the Frankfurt Broadband Network will probably dodge a bullet this time. It will dodge the bullet this time. But I've been assured, I was talking to the manager of the plant board, a guy named Harvey Couch. He said it's coming back next year, so it's not going away. The second attack happened just 10 days ago. New York passed a law creating the Municipal Infrastructure Program, which provides grant funding for communities seeking to build locally owned and controlled broadband networks. According to ILSR, Charter Communications slipped language into the New York State Assembly budget bill that would mandate that the program's funds would be available only to community broadband projects that seek to, quote, serve unserved and underserved locations, rather than to any community that wants to choose local network ownership, which is what the state legislature intended when it passed the program. This anti-competitive and anti-consumer provision would ensure that no municipal network could compete with Charter or any other ISP in the state. And needless to say, Charter would claim so much coverage that only a fraction of locations would be deemed served or unserved or underserved. Thankfully, the Senate budget bill doesn't have this language, and the Governor Hochul, opposes it. We'll know very soon if the final budget includes this language. I've been in touch often with the head of the broadband office there, a guy named Josh Breitbart, and they're really, really fighting hard to make sure that this doesn't come to fruition. In these and other examples, there are three main ingredients that make for an effective defense against the incumbents and the dark money organizations that are paid handsomely to foil public broadband. First, and most importantly, and I think I've made this point already, but it bears repeating, leadership and doggedness from the proponents of the public network, including community leaders and residents. The local support that motivates a community to consider or build a public broadband network in the first place is the best defense against attacks. If you can get state and congressional representatives to weigh in, all the better. And of course, AAPB will always be there to do what it can to raise the profile of these issues. But community support is paramount. Second, media and press attention. The battles in Bountiful and Falmouth were won in part because the local media questioned the funding of the dark money organizations and promoted the notion that communities should have the freedom to choose which broadband network would best serve the needs of their residents. Kentucky's local and state press have also been key to delaying action on Senator Williams' bill. The shrinking of local press throughout the country and the national press's disinterest in this issue makes this strategy much, much more difficult. Now, supporters may have to turn to paid media like Facebook and TV or radio ads to supplement or replace this coverage. I can give a whole nother speech about local news deserts and the death of local news. And I'm glad to see, well, it was Sarah. She was here. You're the one whose telephone went off, wasn't it? Oh, good. Hear from the press, and I think that's terrific because local press, I think, is vital to a healthy democracy, and we need more of it, not less of it. Third, pushing back forcefully on the tired arguments made by incumbents and their surrogates. And these arguments really are 20 years old. Opponents of public broadband typically make three arguments. First, that all community networks are failures. Second, that they are a waste of taxpayer dollars that could be used to build bridges and roads and strengthen schools. And third, that it is unfair for the private sector to compete against the government. Let me take this in turn. First, the failures, because that's the favorite one. If you go to nogovinternet.com, that's where you get, they're all failures, they all fail. Almost every example opponents of public broadband cite is about 2 decades old and taken from a University of Pennsylvania law school study funded by the cable industry. And as a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, that makes me very sad. Were there public broadband failures then? Yes. When demand for broadband was low and equipment prices were high. Today, however, with the demand for broadband skyrocketing and equipment and other costs much lower, public broadband failures are few and far between. And of course, private networks fail too. Does anybody remember Adelphia? Anybody? Okay, yeah, okay. That was just one private failure. But the best defense against the failure argument are the numerous success stories. We have to keep telling our stories. Second, many public broadband networks are built not with taxpayer dollars, but with municipal bonds and other alternative means of financing, like loans from enterprise funds or grants from government and philanthropy. Regardless, Given the centrality of broadband to full participation in our society, our economy, our health and education systems, and our civic life, local policymakers have every right to prioritize broadband. Like roads and bridges, broadband is infrastructure. And obviously Congress recognized it when it gave $65 billion to build out broadband in this country. Finally, this is my favorite argument. I can only laugh at the argument that incumbents are completely free market actors competing with the public sector. Would anybody like to venture a guess how much money Charter has taken from the federal government for the ACP? Throw in a number. Close. $3 billion. More than $3 billion. And by the way, that's like triple. I think the next is T-Mobile. Just to triple the amount. T-Mobile is at $1 billion. And Charter, Comcast, AT&T, and other ISPs will be seeking billions more from the BEAD program. So the argument that they shouldn't be forced to compete with the public sector while taking billions of taxpayer dollars doesn't pass the red face test. Proponents of community broadband networks have so far been successful in beating back these recent attacks, which is something to celebrate. But the negative effects do linger. Efforts to slow or stop public broadband bills can be very costly, both in time and money. And worst of all, the inevitable attacks serve to discourage other communities from choosing public broadband, even if it would be a far better choice for their residents. The mayor of a mid-sized city recently confessed to me that he was doing everything in his power to hide the city's interest in owning a network because he knew it would lead to an intense lobbying and pressure campaign by the incumbent cable operator. I'm happy to say the city is still moving forward, but many communities might not be willing to deal with that kind of pressure. And trust me, I know from my own nominations process, that it could be extremely unpleasant. That's why AAPB is on a mission to double the number of households served by public broadband networks in the next 5 years. Without a doubt, there is strength in numbers. And despite their enormous resources, the greater the number of successful public broadband networks, the harder it will be for the big incumbents to beat them back. We want to give people the tools they need to consider and move forward on owning their own broadband infrastructure. And we want to provide a robust defense for doing so, including ensuring that public broadband networks are not disadvantaged from receiving state, local, and federal funding. I hope you'll consider joining AAPB. I know I've been pumping AAPB up. We need more members. I hope you'll consider joining AAPB so we can continue the best of times for public broadband, while at the same time severely limiting the worst of times. Thank you.
We have a couple minutes for questions if anyone has anything they'd like to, what?
Grab the mic, please.
Yeah, sure. Anyone's got, I don't have.
Ask me anything.
Nope.
Did you get a Caitlin Clark jersey?
I didn't, but I got a great jersey that said Iowa has women's basketball. No, it says Iowa has basketball, and it also has men's basketball. I think I'm going to wear that one to my speaking engagement tomorrow. Hey, Tom.
Tom Esselman, I'm from Kansas City. I'm here for a couple of reasons. I was introduced to Curtis and John. Hi, John. I haven't met you yet in person. By Rachel Merlo from Google Fiber, which you mentioned is now referring to its services as G Fiber. And as early as last December, when I completed about 7 years working with PCs for People, I also was in West Des Moines completing the end of the first year of a community development block grant that Google Fiber actually put us up to. That was with the city of West Des Moines to make sure that the residents who were starting to access the municipal broadband network were getting affordable computers and training and hotspots for those who weren't yet able to enroll in the network. So I wanted you to comment on if you have other examples of how Google Fiber in this instance or any other providers really are taking to heart the opportunity to be more collaborative and what that might mean for those of us who are really, advocates and proponents of community broadband networks.
I mean, you see it all over the country. I mean, you know, the ones that are locally owned obviously have roots in the community, right? Look, you know, I know I beat up a lot on Comcast and Charter, but to be honest, I mean, I think they've done a very good job of getting people on the ACP. You know, Comcast has had Internet Essentials for 15 years, and have really built it up. So, I mean, I do give them credit in that regard. I'm only beating up on Charter because, you know, on the one hand, they take government money. On the other hand, they say, you know, government can't, you know, own a network. So I think I wouldn't say it's across the board, but I would say both private and public actors are doing a pretty darn good job. And Comcast really has like digital equity initiatives in every single community that they're in. So, you know, again, I'll beat up on them, but I'll also give them credit where credit is due. I just wish they would leave community broadband alone. Or if they want to beat up on community broadband, they should do it in their own name. And it's funny, you know, when Colorado's restriction was you had to have a ballot initiative if you're a community and you wanted to build a public network. And Comcast did lobby in its own name in 120 municipalities and lost every single time. And at that point, Governor Polis and the state legislature was, this is stupid. It's just costing our towns money, so we're going to repeal it. So, you know, like I said, I wish they spent as much money on their networks as they do on lobbyists so they don't have to compete. That's my hope. It's probably never going to happen. So, but that's my hope and wish. But that doesn't mean that they're bad in all aspects of what they do. And particularly digital equity, look, it benefits them, right? More people that get on board, you know, people, you know, hopefully they pull themselves up by their bootstraps and, you know, and get more money and get jobs and everything, you know, all the things that broadband enables, and they can be full paying customers. So there's a real benefit to having them online.
Hi, Ryan Boone, and I'm with Premier Communications, which is actually a private provider. So I'm glad to hear that we're not all bad.
I didn't say that.
But you mentioned Iowa has the most municipal providers. You also have the most private providers or independent providers, and Curtis knows that well. I think serve well over 300 communities in Iowa. And I was just curious, you know, we try to also distance ourselves from Charter and Comcast and more locally, probably some of the other bigger providers that we all know and I won't name. But, you know, we look at ourselves as locally based, you know, community-based providers. And do you have examples of where, I'll say, smaller, independent, locally owned providers have partnered with communities? You know, that's one of the things that I think in Iowa we've done really well is we actually partner with the community as a private provider. And we have one example in Webster City. I mean, our entity, along with another partner, spent, I think, $26 million building out the community in the rural area and did it in 2 years with the community's support. And are there other examples like that where we can actually partner together instead of battling each other?
Absolutely. And by the way, just let me say, my organization isn't of the mind that every single town, every single community must have a network that's owned by the government, right? But what we do believe is that every single community needs to be able to have the freedom to choose, right? That there shouldn't be any kind of blockades between them making that decision. And interesting, in Falmouth, I mean, they're going through this right now, where some in the community want to go with a private carrier that's promising a lot of good things, and others want a municipal network. And they when I went there, they wanted me to put the finger on the scale, and I'm like, I'm not going to do it. You know, it's really up to the community to choose. And nowadays, you know, sort of the utility model, it's interesting. For example, Fairlawn, Ohio, there's still a bunch of communities that are choosing to actually start a broadband utility where they didn't have an electrical utility before. But that's actually far less the examples of what's going on now in community broadband. It's more public-private partnerships, right? Like with the Utopia Fiber, or, and I'm saying this because I'm on the board of 2Cows, which is the parent company of Ting. I was going to use Ting as a perfect example of a local ISP. They do have some public-private partnerships with communities that own the infrastructure, but they also have their own networks, like in Alexandria, Virginia, 5 miles from my house. And they do an exceptional job. I wouldn't serve on their board if they didn't, of working with communities. Alexandria is really a perfect example because Alexandria didn't want to own the network, right? So, but they had a liaison, a woman named Catherine Rice, who works directly with the community to give them what they needed. And what's interesting is they have an ACP offering, right? So if you're for $30 or free, if you're eligible for the ACP, you get 2 gigs symmetrical. And that's the kind of thing that they worked out with the community so low-income families could be served. But I think there are a lot of companies like yours, like Ting, that do really consider themselves, really hyper-local and want to work with the community. Because if you don't work with the community, then, you're basically, you're giving an invitation for them maybe to build their own network or to bring somebody else in. It's interesting, Cape Cod, as I said before, is dominated by Comcast, but when Falmouth put out like a request for proposals, I got a half a dozen of them. And it's a city of 35,000 people. It's not small, but it's not big either. So like a lot of folks now, both public and private, are chomping at the bit to try to get into these communities. So if you don't do right by your local community, they'll find somebody else. Yeah.
I just want to follow up on that. If you notice our new logo for C-band, the John Ann designed, is a bridge, because we firmly believe from the day that we started C-band that the private sector has a way of dealing with the community in a good way. And it's a lot of times that the communities don't know how to ask the right questions. And so we actually worked in Webster City. We worked in a lot of small towns in order to build that bridge. And so we welcome everybody to continue that.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Marcus. I'm from COS Systems. I just wanted to see what your opinion on would be when municipalities building their own infrastructure and then using open access to go in there and offer, services from different providers for their customers. What are your viewpoint on that?
I love it. Again,
Kind of like what Utopia is doing down in Utah.
It's exactly
right?
what Utopia is doing. Kim McKinley would kill me if I said anything else, but but other companies are doing it. Bonfire's doing it. Underline's doing it. I think, look, Ammon, Idaho is doing it, right? Tiny little Ammon, Idaho. They have I think 20 providers, and there's an offering that's a gigabit offering that's like $20. I mean, it's crazy. In my own perfect world, there'd be open access everywhere, but it doesn't work everywhere, right? It just doesn't. But I do love it, and thank you for being a member of AAPB. COS Systems is, so I know all the members by heart.
Hi, my name is Greg Levy, and I have the privilege of working in the private sector of Iowa, but the company I work for is contracted with the state of Iowa's broadband department, so I get the pleasure of working with many of the providers around the state, both municipal and private. And, as Mr. Boone had mentioned, our state also not only the most municipal, but also the most private ISPs in the country, over 150, I believe. And Ryan, you probably know better, but largely, exceptional. So we have a very small number of these large providers that, for lack of a better word, tend to be the problem children, right? But, I guess I'm just curious as far as when we talk about affordability with the direction that ACP is going, or maybe has gone.
Yeah, it's going down.
How do these smaller providers meet those standards of affordability? I mean, largely it is affordable, but in the eyes of some of these bigger companies that can spread that cost across many tens of thousands of customers, as opposed to maybe hundreds or just thousands. How do these small providers?
I mean, you asked the $1 million question, and I think, this is where the state, I think, is going to have to jump in. I could give, a whole other speech about what I think not only Congress should be doing, but what the FCC, I think the FCC could actually save this program if it reformed its universal service contribution, universal service fund contribution mechanism. It's not, the current chairwoman's not willing to do it, and I don't want to say any more about that. But I think that's going to throw it to the states. So actually, John and I met when I spoke at the Merit Conference in Michigan. What was that, in November? And I was approached by Eric Frederick, who's the head of the office there. He's fantastic, the state broadband office. And he's like, Gigi, how do we build a digital equity fund to bridge the gap if the ACP goes away? And I think states need to think about that. So a combination of industry, philanthropy, whatever monies you can scrape up, so you at least you can fill the gap until either Congress or the FCC acts. I mean, I think eventually they're going to have to act. There's over 23 million homes on the ACP, but I think the states really need to think about how you guys can continue to provide that. I assume is it essentially free if the ACP customers? I'll ask the gentleman, is it Ryan? And so what do you charge ACP customers?
I mean, our lowest offering is probably about $40.
Okay, so fine, they pay $10, right? So, free or essentially free. I think NTIA actually did a study once that showed that low-income people are willing to pay no more than $10 a month for broadband. That's just about what the top line is. So I think you said you're contracting with the state broadband office. Are they thinking about something like this? I hope they are.
We hope so too. It's just been with the upcoming BEAD program, some of the requirements there, we're thinking about that and trying to figure out how that works with Iowa's unique situation where we have a whole lot of small providers that can't necessarily afford to bridge that gap,
Right.
especially when you're talking about rural broadband where it's the most expensive to build and serve.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm sure most people in this room know, but to get BEAD funding, you had to be part of the ACP, right? But now the ACP is going away, then what happens? And that's that's the $1 million question. I do a lot of work with the communications union districts in Vermont. So in Vermont, a bunch of towns get together and build their own infrastructure. And they are really freaked out over the ACP. And they're also freaked out about NTIA or the state office. The state office won't do it because they're very close to the CUDs. But setting a price for what affordable is. Because in places like Vermont and here where it's really rural, the cost of providing service is huge. So I'm very sympathetic. But again, I think, I was a huge supporter of the bipartisan infrastructure laws provisions that gave broadband funding to the states. I'm a veteran of many poor federal decisions when it came to funding broadband. So when I was at the FCC under Tom Wheeler, we did the CAF 2 funding, which was a total disaster. We required 10-1, and it was a disaster, and it's still a disaster. Believe it or not, there are still CAF 2 awardees who have not built their networks yet. I was at the FCC from 2013 to 2016. What does that tell you? So I was really, really glad that the states, because I think the states know much better than the feds what's going on the ground. But, with that responsibility also comes the responsibility to ensure that people can stay online. And I do hope the state office here is thinking about it. It's not easy. And I know, did you tell me, John, your state office is 8 people?
In Michigan.
Oh, Michigan.
It's about 10 people.
Well, what is it here?
Greg, what do you think? Somewhere around there.
Yeah. Maine. So the state of Maine, where I spoke also in November of last year, has 21 people for a state that has 1.7 million residents. So anyway, interesting.
12 million people in Michigan just for a franchise.
Right. Arizona, believe it or not, up until recently had 3. It's, which is crazy to me.
All right, we got a couple minutes left. If we have a final question or comment. All right.
Nothing from the online crew, reporting in from the producer studio.
All right, let's give Gigi a round of applause.
Thank you very much.